If there's one thing that Zelda's transition from 2D to 3D did to the series, it was taking those darker fantasy themes found in parts of the Game Boy and Super Nintendo entries and enhancing them to become an integral part of the Zelda experience. It seems strange to talk about these older games as having darker themes when you have overtly lighthearted fragments of gameplay littered throughout them. But they were certainly there and were noticeably different enough to cause Zelda to stand out as a more mature game series in Nintendo's lineup. So when Ocarina of Time made its debut, fans flocked to it, heralding it as one of the best video games of all time. And we should have just stopped making video games there, because holy hell do I feel stupid even mentioning that people considered it and still do consider it to be a masterpiece to this day. Regardless, Miyamoto gave the order and the boys decided to crank out another mainline game with even darker themes that really helped to cement Zelda as something wholly different from the likes of Mario, Kirby, Donkey Kong, and I don't know, Gex. There's a good chance that this grittier and more melancholy title was the reason for the ideas that led to the Wind Waker's creation. When the GameCube was still in development and Majora's Mask had yet to even make its debut, the Zelda team had already gotten to work on whipping up a demo that impressed and wowed fans. One that followed the same aesthetics and trajectory as its N64 predecessors. The series director at the time, Eiji Aonuma, wasn't happy with what he felt was a stagnation of the franchise, which is a batshit sentiment to have nowadays in a land of remakes, remasters, and reboots. Regardless, the team ignored the hype surrounding the 2000 Space World Exposition demo and forged ahead with a more cartoonish, lighthearted aesthetic that embodied cel shading as the vehicle to present their next project. Of course, Shiggy wasn't very happy with this shift from what had worked, and gently questioned the team's sanity as they happily slaved away on a Zelda game that revolved around sailing the ocean as opposed to running up to Ganondorf in a big castle and beating him with a stick until he falls over. Motorola eventually relented and let the team continue to have fun and be creative, leading to another demo in 2001 that received significantly more criticism than what was previously presented. In a Grandmaster level move, Nintendo decided that not telling anyone shit until the game was pretty much done was the way to go, something that became the norm for a lot of future releases and projects when the executives found themselves insecure about a game that was on the horizon. When The Wind Waker eventually made its debut, it was met with widespread acclaim, a cavalcade of praise that amounted to, "Hey, this is amazing, but have you played Ocarina of Time? Because this cartoon shit is pretty lame when compared to that absolute masterpiece." Nah, in all seriousness, the game was received surprisingly well, with most review outlets calling out the criticism of the graphical style as unfounded. And let's be honest, there was a lot of criticism over the art direction by fans outside of Japan. I was there for it. There was tons of grumbling over the idea that Nintendo was going full baby mode for little kids and getting away from the gruff and realistic graphics of, I guess this shit. The game undersold expectations, the blame seeming to fall on the idea that the graphics were a turnoff for teens and that the game didn't innovate enough. Yeah, the one where you sail around on an ocean didn't innovate enough according to Mr. Moto. I'd talk about how the GameCube was a failure of a console when stacked against the N64, and how the N64 was a failure when stacked against the Super Nintendo, but the fact remains that the lower number means that the Wind Waker's creative new coat of paint and presentation was pushed out from having a direct sequel, instead relegated to handheld offshoots that wouldn't have a chance to hurt Nintendo again. I don't know, this shit has always driven me crazy. I love when a game looks good, but I always put story and gameplay above graphical fidelity. And while somebody could argue that I was 10 years old and the perfect demographic for something more cartoonish when The Wind Waker released in the US in March of 2003, I had still played and enjoyed those N64 entries and was just as surprised at the shift in tone. Still, I pored over my February 2003 issue of Nintendo Power in class, absorbing every detail of this strange, sailing-oriented version of this series that used to be about climbing inside of the moon to stab God and prevent the apocalypse. They just don't make them how they used to. The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker has been one of my favorite games of all time since its release. It's what I consider to be one of the best executed Zelda games, if not the best in many ways. I've always hesitated on jumping into a game that I know that I will love revisiting. I mean, let's be honest, the appeal to watching somebody revisit a game to see if it still holds up is to see if it does hold up in the reviewer's opinion, and then to verbally abuse them when they don't align with your opinion. It's the circle of life. Watching somebody gush over a game that they knew they would fully appreciate from the get-go doesn't make for extraordinarily intricate analysis. It's one of the main reasons that I haven't covered shit like FromSoft games, Chrono Trigger, or Looney Tunes B-Ball for the Super Nintendo. And sure enough, as I began to cover the introductory sequence to this game, it became clear fast that my observations weren't particularly interesting to listen to in my opinion, so I decided to pivot a bit. In this video, I'll be talking through the Wind Waker's gameplay, story, exploration, themes, and unique creativity. But I'll also be delving into how it compares to Zelda games as a whole, particularly the more popular entries, and analyzing a lot of how they evolved and in some cases devolved as a whole. I'll obviously still be focusing primarily on the Wind Waker and its role in the franchise, but my point is that this whole video is probably going to be structured a little differently than my usual stuff. Oh, and also I'll be spoiling quite a few games if you care about that. Just like a bunch of games, so here's your warning. Either way, there are now, I think, 3 or so ways to play this game through official channels. I have access to all 3, and while the Switch 2 emulation is the most convenient way to go, I'm gonna stick with the Wii U's HD version, which is generally considered the best edition of the game to this day. I was just gonna leave it at that, but basically the Wii U version has a variety of quality of life changes, better graphics, and a change to the endgame that was a common complaint back on the GameCube edition. Before I begin, I want you to know that I got a new shirt. Not like me personally, but like, there's a shirt that you can buy. My wife made the design. Shirts help support the channel, and you get a shirt out of it. So, I mean, consider that. It's extraordinarily easy to see why some were concerned with the direction of Zelda based off of the main menus and introductory sequence alone. I mean, you come from 2 games that started like this, and wound up going this direction instead. And I get it. I was, again, at an age where this kind of intro was whimsical and enchanting, and it honestly still is for me now. They nailed the vibe that they were going for in every way, and it strays hard from galloping through an open field or watching the devil charge at you at an uncomfortable speed. The starting sequence plays out a 5 or so minute round of scenes that first have you witnessing the history of what happened to Hyrule, presumably after the events of Ocarina of Time. The issue with getting into the whole Zelda timeline is twofold. For one, Nintendo has gone back and forth on what's canon in the series. I recall picking up the Hyrule Historia under the pretense that this was the definitive explanation and timeline that linked all Zelda games together smoothly. Well, smoothly is kind of a stretch because even then the book had games splitting off into multiple timelines that depended on the results of Ocarina of Time, but it was my understanding that it was supposed to be a pretty accurate way to tie these games together, and the reality is that Aonuma has more or less stated that the book was more of a fun fan project that tries to piece together lore than a definitive truth. Which leads me to a more pressing issue. Zelda games just aren't complex works of deeply written art. Don't get me wrong, there are standout moments and ideas that help the player to immerse themselves in the world, but most of the time, Zelda's concepts are pretty basic fantasy ideas that don't bring enough detail to the table to make those concepts really shine. There are definitely exceptions to this, which I will show in a moment, but as a franchise, story has always come second or third. And I'm not trying to knock the series here, because it's been confirmed quite a few times by the dev team that they kinda just wing out these ideas without thinking too hard about how they tie into other games. It's hardly ever been the focus of Zelda, and it likely never will be, which makes analyzing any sort of deeper story themes an exercise in futility. Zelda has nearly always been all vibes, with few instances of taking the time to really expand on what's presented. I'll circle back to this idea after we get deeper into the Wind Waker story. The point for now is that despite these games having loose connections to each other, it's much easier to think of each game's storyline as its own thing. In the case of The Wind Waker, Ganon took over, the people prayed to their gods, and those gods flooded the land, creating a world of oceans and islands. That leads us to a scene with our main character who's just napping and doing nothing of particular import on an island that has maybe a dozen people on it. The Wind Waker's intro sequence falls squarely in the middle between Twilight Princess's dark and lengthy narrative and Breath of the Wild's nearly non-existent one. With Twilight Princess, you had this much more grounded, realistic approach, almost a spite project to clap back at the initial reception of The Wind Waker. You had probably the most dialogue-heavy game in the franchise, which takes the time to display Link as part of a village who can use his help with various chores as a capable young man. And soon after, an invasion occurs that has him being attacked and tossed headlong into the Twilight Zone. And, then he anamorphs into a wolf, and that was always weird and probably led to a lot of awakenings in young DeviantArt members. Remind me to cover this game sometime if this video gains any interest. But this was definitely the standout Zelda game in terms of plot that does much more to illustrate meaningful detail within its universe. On the other end of the spectrum, Breath of the Wild's intro just throws you out into the world and might as well be a rehash of the very first game on the NES, not bothering to do anything unique by any means. In terms of story, the gameplay was wholly unique. Let's not fucking put words in my mouth. I need to fucking say that shit right now. I'm talking about the story. So The Wind Waker falls between those two and is probably relatively comparable to the Ocarina of Time, but you get to start with people who love you. Here's your hero, he's a child who's just come of age, and he's about to be thrown into a world-shaking adventure. Actually, here's a handy chart that I pulled out of my ass to illustrate where the plots compare to each other. Here are my credentials on the side to show what I know and don't know. But yeah, The Wind Waker is pretty up the middle, maybe more towards the good in terms of story. Even to this day, the thing that sticks out to me about Link being thrown onto this path is just how much heart and emotion that the devs put into these scenes. Yeah, they're not getting the Pulitzer Prize for literary genius, but every character is intentionally expressive and lovingly crafted. The team went with the big, goofy eyes for characters so that you could really see their emotion at any given time, which is seen front and center with Link's reactions to various events. It leans into the exact issues that people had with the cell shading, but it's hard to argue with the end product when everything looks and feels this cute. The story progresses on the premise of Link's birthday, which has him following a ritual that every boy goes through at this age, wearing a weird fucking tunic. Birthday wishes don't mean shit on Outset Island, as our guy is forced to wear this strange, uncomfortably warm garb to indicate that he's a mysterious age. Going out to show off to his sister has him using her telescope to spot a gigantic rock flapping along with a kidnapped girl, being chased by pirates who smoke the thing with a big stone. This leads to Link rushing off to grab a sword in an attempt to rescue the pirate girl from the nearby forest where she fell. I always found the bird's trajectory funny, and this is all semantics, but the thing comes in from the north, which is where its nest is. So instead of napping this girl and swinging back to its nest, it took her way to the south. Unless she was picked up an island away and he was evading or something. It's not important, it's just a thought that I always had. Anyways, Link rescues her, and when the rock comes back around, it plucks his sister instead. This leads to our guy requesting passage with the pirates in order to get to the Forbidden Fortress where his sister was taken. It's all cute and stylized as usual, with Grandma being sad and Link waving goodbye to the island before ferrying across the ocean. After being stuffed into a barrel and shot at a speed that would kill a man, Link finds himself swordless on the edge of the Forbidden Fortress. And I think this whole chain of events is probably one of the most creative setups for Link's adventure across the series, barring Majora's Mask. Again, Twilight Princess is a whole other thing, but that intro is also probably 2 or 3 times as long as this one is. Scaling the fortress has you getting your basic adventuring controls down, which I don't have a particularly strong interest in discussing the same way that I do with the boat stuff later. The only thing worth noting is that the precursor to Breath of the Wild's picking up and wielding of enemy weapons was born in this game. And while it isn't anything particularly amazing, it does still feel really cool later on when you fight Dark Nuts. I don't know why they're called Dark Nuts, probably a mistranslation of Dark Knight, But basically you grab their swords and cause them to resort to using their fists. You play a bit of a stealth section that has you eventually making it to your sword and regaining the ability to fight properly once again. I've never been a fan of being powerless this immediately, especially when you had just gotten a taste of combat back on Outset Island, but it's not like this area is particularly lengthy, it just feels a little out of place this early on. I guess if anything, it demonstrates just how fucking crazy this child running into an evil fortress to save his sister is. Upon regaining the sword and reaching the summit, the game does at least do something that I've always enjoyed, showing off the malicious nature of the big bad guy and giving you a goal to work towards upon your defeat. I think the only other Zelda that has you making it pretty immediately to the end boss and having you escape in some way was the previous entry Majora's Mask, and I enjoyed that display of power then too. In this case, Ganondorf has Link tossed into the ocean, which would certainly kill him in one way or another. Fortunately, our guy floats and is picked up by the King of Red Lions, the boat with the talking head attached to it. This has always been and is still very fucking weird, but you get used to it. Without a sail, the boat is pretty much useless on the Great Sea, so we get to do a bit of shopping and exploration on Windfall Island. This is 100% one of the biggest draws to the Wind Waker's gameplay. Though we didn't roll up on this place manually, it is still an island in the middle of a gigantic ocean. And walking around this small hub of people, secrets, minigames, and shops is a taste of the discovery that's to come when you get to start floating out to sea and picking where you want to go yourself. The main thing about Windfall is that there's hardly ever anything serious going on. Nearly every person has some quirk about them, making it so that normal people with normal dialogue is a rarity. You would think that would get exhausting, but when done right, it's really not that bad of a thing. To compare it to a more recent game, Windfall Island is a lot like wandering into a more grounded gestural village from Clair Obscur. Adults simultaneously criticize you for being a kid while asking for your help in the next breath. Kids acknowledge that they're children but berate you for treating them as such. Shops and minigames have these weird people hanging about and waiting for what could realistically be their only customer for the day. A rich father and a poor father both beg you for help with saving their daughters, who were also kidnapped by Ganondorf. This guy sits at the top of a hill and does whatever the hell this is.
You're ugly, you're disgusting, I'm gonna kill you, give me $200.
It's a strange town that feels bright and cheerful, but just plain odd at the same time, something that's been emulated across a lot of series towns. This really isn't a standout event in a Zelda game, as most of them still embody that really out there goofiness to varying degrees. As much as I've harped on the idea that these games aren't terribly deep with their lore, the idea of creating really serious towns full of miserable people would be jarring given how the series has historically gone. Clocktown had people bustling to and fro, living their lives despite a gigantic moon with a face the size of Texas looming down on them. And even then you'd have these weirdos like the banker going nuts in the corner or the spirit of Kamuro hanging outside of town and dancing away. You had Goron City in Ocarina of Time with most of its residents turning out to be these goofy rock boys who had wholly different priorities from humans in other towns. The starting village in Link's Awakening embodied the strange dreamlike state that the game revealed itself to be in, with people all doing their own detached thing in ways that felt uncanny but still fun to explore. And there are countless other examples across most of the games, though I will again point at Breath of the Wild as being the odd man out in this regard. Most towns didn't really do much for me, even if Gerudo Town was a standout within the franchise. Maybe that's more of a testament to the game's size and sparse setting though. So you would think that with that opinion, the Wind Waker must have quite a few towns like Windfall where quirky people are running amok and flagging you down for help. And you would be dead wrong because there's only 3 or 4 areas of this map that could be considered a town of sorts, and you've been to 2 of them at this stage. In fact, Windfall is the only place that's this lively. If ever there was a Zelda game that was focused on game mechanics first and foremost as the vehicle to garner the most enjoyment from playing it, then the Wind Waker is the one that embodies that philosophy first and foremost. Because instead of making big floating islands filled with buildings and docks and fleets, it really does take this idea that society was reset when it was flooded and runs with it. I guess it's difficult to quantify my exact feelings here. I like big bustling towns and cities that teem with life and activity. I like smaller, quieter villages with a few fun things to do. But I also like this game that only has one real instance of that because it takes the effort usually applied in defining those areas and instead implements it in sheer unrivaled exploration. Nabbing the sail allows you to finally get out on the Great Sea to, well, follow the wind for now. It's a tutorial of sorts before you're thrown to the wolves, one that allows you to familiarize yourself with how sea travel is going to go. And I'll skip ahead to just talking about everything at once rather than bouncing back and forth. But the basic stuff here is that you wind up getting the titular Wind Waker soon after this initial voyage, which is your musical instrument of the game, replacing the Ocarina in the 2 games prior. All of the major capabilities of the Ocarina come packed into the Wind Waker, from teleporting around the map to changing the time of day to unlocking particular doors and solving puzzles. But the main difference has you changing the direction of the wind, making traversing the sea feasible with a single-sailed vessel. That said, this did get pretty annoying, and the Wii U version has a swift sail that allows you to not need to bother with changing the wind every time. When the Wind Waker was initially being planned out, the sea was the first thing that the devs cooked up according to an interview with Aonuma. The wind came second, which was then extrapolated out to be one of the central themes of the game. The act of sailing was simply a minigame at first, not intended to be the main form of traveling. It soon became the main feature when the devs realized the potential of creating a game that resonated with the core philosophy of the very first Zelda game. Miyamoto's inspirations behind the series involved him exploring the woods as a child, which stuck with him throughout his life and made him want to create a game that embodied the idea of exploring a miniature garden. With how expansive the ocean is, seeing islands pop up on the horizon continues the spirit of the original game. The sensation of wondering what that is, what's on it, what secrets it hides. And all of this was developed with the GameCube's limitations in mind. Too slow and sailing across the ocean would become boring. Too fast and loading an island, enemies, or obstacles would cause the game to stutter and lag. These guys were banking on striking the perfect balance down to the millisecond so that the experience was still enjoyable. The game takes the Zelda formula of unlocking new equipment and applies it to ocean travel as well, causing your bombs to give you a cannon and the grappling hook to become a crane for underwater salvaging. Traversing the sea without items like your bow, boomerang, and bombs makes things a lot scarier, as the devs decided to sprinkle in hazards like gigantic whirlpools caused by big octos and a perpetually roaming tornado that's piloted by an angry god. Both can be dealt with if you have the right equipment, but without them you can't do anything but accept your fate as you get slowly drawn into destruction. I know it seems silly, but even to this day this stuff both fascinates me and fills me with dread when I'm not equipped for the job. It makes sailing through uncharted territory that much more suspenseful, and it hasn't been replicated in many other video games to this day. Sea of Thieves is a big one, which is a title that I absolutely adore. But the only other game that really imparts this same kind of vibe would be something like Assassin's Creed 4 to my knowledge. But even that didn't really include the same kind of mythical dangers that the Wind Waker does. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what older titles may have inspired these mechanics, but the only thing that really even remotely came to mind was Sid Meier's Pirates. And even that one's a stretch. I mean, you can look at the original Zeldas and get the Tolkien vibes, the medieval European setting, the usual kind of fantasy stuff. But I mean, these are really unique inclusions that have hardly been touched on in the gaming space.
It's a really full triple, quadruple A game that will deliver in the long run.
The only thing that comes close besides Sea of Thieves would probably be Sunless Sea, another game that I enjoyed the hell out of for many of the same reasons that I do with the Wind Waker. Zelda has always been great about this, with some excelling more than others. Breath of the Wild is obviously fantastic about it, and the gameplay and trials are some of the best that the series has to offer. A Link Between Worlds also felt amazing to explore and is probably one of my favorite Zeldas of all time. But even when you take the best of the land-based Zeldas and stack their exploratory themes and settings against the Wind Waker, I have a really difficult time stating that they're better than a game that gives you a wide ocean and lets you tackle it at your leisure. Whereas many other games have you mounting up on your horse to get to your next destination as fast as possible, the act of traveling in the Wind Waker in and of itself is the main draw a lot of the time. Windy updrafts, shark-like enemies, sunken treasure, ghost ships, or ghost ship, I guess. There's just one, lonesome islands with buried maps. All of it is this soulful naval adventure where the simple act of mapping out the world feels rewarding and worth the effort. Every time you bribe a fish with bait and map out the quadrants, you learn a rumor about the world. The power to freeze fire 1 tile north and 4 tiles west, a mysterious bomb merchant to the north, sightings of a ghost ship during crescent moons. It's the classic sensation of writing down discoveries in a notepad in order to visit them later. and it's an amazing experience the first time you play through the game. I don't really think there's too much more that I can say about it without just gushing and repeating myself more than I already have, so let's continue on with my journey for now. Your next stop is Dragon Roost Island, which would be the third of 3 or 4 towns if you could call it that. Really, there's just one proper town with 3 villages, and this village of bird people is easy to jet through and speak with everyone in about 10 minutes, including the playing of the rupee minigame. And again, this is kind of what I was talking about previously when it comes to how the devs introduce ideas without diving too much deeper. You have these bird people called Rito. They usually wind up as mail workers for the world due to their flying capabilities, and that's about as much as we get out of them. They have a village chief, a prince, attendants, and I mean that's it. They do the mail. This island is a post office with a big dragon on top. Like, it feels like the devs go, okay, throw out a bunch of ideas on this whiteboard and let's see what we come up with. And then they pick out the coolest ones and they're like, sick, alright, make some light reasoning for them being here and then let's plan a dungeon out. It's Zelda 101. Every major and minor character is a vessel to give a quest or objective, and when you accomplish your goal, they might turn out to be a great sage or something even if they didn't know it yet. It happened with Ocarina of Time sages, A Link to the Past 7 maidens, A Link Between Worlds sages. And to further tie this game to Ocarina specifically, your current goal is the tracking of 3 goddess pearls mimicking the spiritual stones needed to unleash the Master Sword from its slumber. In this case, our first pearl is retrieved after making an effort to calm the angry dragon at the top of the island's volcano. This is a relatively standard affair as far as first dungeons go, but makes a show out of utilizing every basic mechanic the game can throw at you before giving you your first piece of equipment. This actually isn't super common in most Zelda games if I recall correctly, as you'll usually have access or get access to your first major piece of equipment relatively early on, either in or before the first dungeon. Twilight Princess gives you all sorts of shit before you make it to the Monkey Dungeon, and doesn't bother with puzzles that don't rely on equipment or nearby bombs. Majora's Mask has you entering with the Deku Mask on, which has powers built into it. A Link to the Past has you nabbing the boomerang almost immediately if you count the castle as the first dungeon. It leads to a trend of rather lazy puzzle creativity where you simply have to use one of 2 or 3 equipment pieces to progress, and it tends to be pretty obvious regarding when to use what. And only 2 games really take the basics and create something fun out of it, this game and Ocarina of Time. Ocarina does of course give you access to the likes of Deku Nuts, sticks, and the slingshot immediately. But there's still that moment where you jump off of the top of the dungeon and fall through the webbing, which kinda wowed me as a kid. So I guess it still falls in the parameters of giving you stuff immediately, but it does take other things that don't apply to that stuff and make something out of them. As far as the Wind Waker goes, most of it is business as usual while you play with the water jugs to create passages over lava and the different sticks and swords that the enemies drop in order to light torches and break down barricades. But the one that I forgot about that stumped me for a moment was hanging from the ledge to sidle along it, something that I completely forgot about in the moment and kept trying to climb up to it before figuring it out. The amount of this dungeon that has you using nothing but your sword and other basic mechanics far outpaces any other Zelda game. It doesn't overstay its welcome either, giving you the grappling hook halfway through the dungeon and allowing you to begin to explore using all of its utilization. The grappling hook is basically the hook shot but swingier. Pull yourself across gaps, stun and kill certain enemies or take their loot from them, all that fun stuff. The mini-boss music is my favorite across the series and always feels really engaging due to how the music stabs along with your swings. And the boss itself is, I don't know, it's basic and easy if you know what you're doing, like pretty much any other first boss. Though it's also worth noting that Shigmo specifically kept reducing the difficulty constantly in order to create a game that anyone could beat. Which I heavily disagree with, but I guess it also means that there are less hits to kill a boss so that you don't have to keep doing the same thing over and over again. The HD version does at least have an optional higher difficulty, which I forgot about until the moment that I read my script just now. Either way, Goma here is as familiar as a boss gets, having connections to many other Zelda games back to the very first one. It also appears in Link's Awakening, Ocarina, and Oracle of Seasons before this game. This is the first one that doesn't use a projectile weapon to take it out, instead relying on the old G-hook to weaken it before you can slice it. Later mainline entries all went back to projectile weapons besides Tears of the Kingdom, making it and Wind Waker rather unique in terms of Goma battles. With the first pearl secured, it's off to the second one way to the south. You would think that this would mean that you could just take off into whatever direction you want, but this whole first stretch of the game through to getting to the Master Sword is very intentional, which is unfortunate but also very Nintendo. If anything, I respect Breath of the Wild more for allowing the player to just go, and it makes this moment where the boat tells you, hey, what the fuck man, go that way, feel that much more annoying. Still, you get to this game's version of the Deku Tree, which imparts to you the best item in this game, one that may look very familiar to those who have played a Zelda game on the Switch. This leaf was always one of the defining assets of the Wind Waker for me, and it opens up a whole new dimension to puzzle solving and exploration, even if it's at times comparable to the Deku Mask's flower copter ability in the previous game. Again, the Wind Waker breaks the formula, as items that are this important for questing are usually reserved for big moments in the middle of a dungeon. Instead, we get it now before the dungeon even starts, and use it to make it into this strange forest spire. I've always found it funny how even in a world packed with ocean water that's dotted with islands, the devs went, fuck it, let's do a forest level. It kinda shows you that despite the ingenuity of the setting, these guys always kinda follow the same beats at some point during development. And it's again one of those things where you sit here and go, wait, how did a forest get here? Is this just the remains of the previous great forest from Ocarina? And no matter how much you think about how this forest might have survived in this world, it doesn't matter because you'll never get the answers. Instead, the answer is basically what I just said. At some point during development, they went, hey, let's do a forest level, and thought about how to implement it from there. The Forbidden Woods is a bit more involved than Dragon Roost, but it is still pretty straightforward. You wind up obtaining the boomerang here, though I'd argue that the leaf is the bigger item for the dungeon as it's used to float, activate turning switches, and move items around. Instead, the boomerang's primary function in this dungeon is again something that's unique among the other titles. Every enemy here is downright annoying to fight. Jellies that duck underground, floating pea-hats that harass you slowly, sticky burr things that cling to you and slow you down, plants that have to be stunned before being sliced. Obtaining the boomerang makes all of these trivial, as it counters them nicely. Yes, of course there are still switches to hit and vines to chop with the boomerang, but those parts seem to take a back seat when compared to the relief that comes with just being able to smoke these enemies that were annoying as all hell to deal with. It makes it feel less like another puzzle solver and more of an actual weapon that's great for hacking away at flying and plant-like enemies. And there are moments like these in other Zelda games. But usually there's just a token enemy in there that's weak to the weapon that you find and you're like, oh shit, okay, this one's easier now. In the Wind Waker's case, almost every enemy in the dungeon is weak to the boomerang, and getting it feels like such a power boost because of that. The boss of course is back to the basics and has you using the thing to strip vines away from the ceiling, but that much is to be expected. Okay, 2 down, 1 to go. Now this is where I've always suspected that the devs ran out of time and cut some content because you roll up to where the third pearl is supposed to be and there ain't shit here besides driftwood and canoe remains. You're told that Ganon's forces have moved faster than we anticipated and now the god of having the third pearl has fled back to Outset Island. And I've tried getting to the bottom of this, trying to figure out if this was truly cut content or not. I have Miyamoto's number. He didn't give it to me, I just found it online. Unfortunately, I don't understand Japanese, so every conversation we've had has been me criticizing him for not speaking English to me until he hangs up. Fortunately, actually Googling my question yields a confirmation that there were roughly 2 or so dungeons that were cut from the game due to rushing it out. Speculation deems that there likely would have been one here for the third pearl, but the game was massive for its time and cutting stuff down was the only feasible way to get it out in a timely manner. There's more to the cut content rumors that I'll get to in a bit, but for now the goal is to pick up some bombs on Windfall so that we can blow up a big ass rock behind Outset Island. This one was always weird to me, but the logic I guess is that Jabun the water spirit fled Ganon's forces and then just decided to hide at Outset Island. There's no real explanation as to why he chose that location or anything of that sort, just that it's a safe haven I guess. Nabbing the bombs from the pirate ship gives us yet another major piece of gear without the aid of a dungeon, though bombs haven't always been a dungeon-specific pickup to be fair. In this case, they double as a cannon that can damage particular enemies and obstacles, something that we'll be doing here momentarily. Traveling back and forth after finding the initial wreckage has you discovering that the environment is in a perpetual stormy nighttime until you find the third pearl, which makes this entire endeavor pretty stressful. It's something that the Wind Waker has always done especially well, using the setting of the game to create tension. You're told that you might as well check in on Outset's residence because you may not get a second chance, but I also have to wonder if this was another scrap of cut content. Visiting the Swordmaster has you able to spar with him, a challenge that yields you rupees and a heart piece depending on how well you do. And visiting Grandma has her sleeping while crying out that she doesn't want to be left alone, which is some sad shit that these guys threw in the game for some reason. But that's all that happens here. And it makes me wonder if this game was meant to be more of a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time than it wound up being. I mean, there are all these little references and ideas that stem directly from the N64 smash hit, so why wouldn't something like time progression also be a thing? And this led me down a mini rabbit hole that I didn't expect in the slightest. So there's some supporting concept art floating around that shows Link gradually aging over time from a kid to an adult in a cartoonish style, right? When you try to search for cut content of Link aging in Wind Waker, you'll find these images that are attributed to the Hyrule Historia. So I thought that since I have that book, I would check it out, and it's nowhere to be found. So I thought that maybe it was in the Japanese version, and I searched around for the image and the same kind of rumor mill kept popping up, that these sketches were an initially planned aging concept. Eventually I found the source of the damn thing, a Japanese fan book containing dev interviews. Of course, I still can't decipher the impossible coded language here, so I did the responsible thing and found the guy in my Discord server who lives in Japan and forced him to perform unpaid labor. And yeah, these are just different stages of concept art that have nothing to do with aging. Which leads us to the question, who's the asshole who made this up and sent me on this real-life quest? Still, the concept of aging would fit well here with the King of Red Lion's warning that seems like it was meant to help the player finish any kid content before the game progresses and people die or age or whatever, especially your grandma and the Swordmaster. And I imagine that whoever started the rumor was less worried about fact-checking and more excited about confirming something that they had theorized. I doubt it was malicious, but we should probably still take that person's Zelda privileges away. Honestly, as much effort as it would have taken to implement, the idea of aging and time traveling would have worked exceedingly well in the Wind Waker. For all intents and purposes, Ocarina was a pretty small sandbox, all things considered. It was amazing seeing how the various hubs had progressed in the 7 years of your absence, but there really wasn't a lot of real estate to observe compared to the likes of the island-dotted Great Sea. And it would have taken a lot of time and work, but I do think that it would have elevated the Wind Waker further. A new town popping up, an expansion of Windfall and Dragon Roost, maybe new boating technology or something similar. But either way, knocking down the wall with the cannon has us meeting with Jabun, which is another very direct reference to Ocarina of Time's Jabu Jabu, much like the Deku Tree. While I personally love this game for what it is, there was a lot of potential for it to be even better and more involved, maybe even imparting that deeper lore that I've been pining for, a direct connection to the Ocarina that weaves together many of its facets with a future where the land has flooded into a gigantic ocean. I'm still obviously happy with what was presented, but it's a little frustrating to think about how tantalizingly close a lot of these ideas got to becoming something brilliant. Placing all 3 pearls at their designated statues has them erupting into a beam of light that causes the Tower of the Gods to rise from the depths of the ocean, the ultimate trial to see if somebody's worthy of the Master Sword. It's an amazing set piece that really sets the game apart from its N64 predecessors just in terms of flawlessly showcasing a lag-free scene of something of this magnitude filling a once empty space. The tower itself is a tightly designed dungeon that feels like you're making substantial progress at every turn. It plays with rising water levels, weight mechanics, and a bit of platforming, and it's really good at making the player feel smart as they navigate everything. It's a classic Zelda dungeon in every sense of the word, and I would say that all of it is great, but there's this one part where you need to control statues in order to progress. And this isn't the worst thing in the world, but the whole process is very slow and tedious. It's not a big deal here, but it becomes a much bigger deal later on, unfortunately, and I've never been a big fan of the mechanic. You wind up gaining the bow here, which is accompanied by the obligatory wall eyeballs to shoot at. Again, this doesn't feel like the main star of the dungeon, which is instead relegated to the command melody and the rising water levels. The boss is an eyeball hand, which is like the 10th time there's been some iteration of this kind of boss in a Nintendo game. There's the I-Rock in Super Mario 64, Wham Bam Rock in Kirby Superstar, Smash Bros. Master Hand, if you count that, Ocarina of Time's Bongo Bongo, Andross from Star Fox, if you count that, fucking Glover, who isn't a Nintendo character, but fuck it, why not? Ramrock in Oracle of Ages, Wario Land 3's final boss, if you count that. I mean, in terms of eyes on hands, some of these don't fit, but you know, whatever. There's a billion more that came after Wind Waker, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that it's a fun fight and that you get to go to the coolest place in the game that isn't the ocean as a result. Heading into the light beam and ringing the bell up top creates a portal that leads deep down below the ocean, the remains of Hyrule Castle frozen in time awaiting Link at the bottom. This is another amazing moment in this game, one that depicts another crossroads that the development team wound up at before making a decision. When Aonuma was tasked with creating another Zelda game, he ultimately decided to abandon the tried and true setting of Ocarina of Time, and he jokingly claims that he decided to bury Hyrule at the bottom of the ocean. This joke wound up more literal when the team began batting around the idea of traveling to and from the seafloor, maybe mixing in the concept of time travel with it. Interestingly enough, Miyamoto has gone on record stating that The Wind Waker was often considered to be too large of a game, attributing content cuts as proof that they didn't need for it to be bigger. This might have been true in 2003, but when you think about the success that something like Elden Ring saw with a map that has multiple layers that seem to just keep expanding, it's kind of crazy what a difference 20 years makes. Entering the castle is an experience in and of itself, with the scenery devoid of color and time frozen mid-invasion, a vivid picture painted of the introductory sequence of this game in which the gods locked Hyrule Castle in a state of purgatory at the behest of the praying Hylians. If I had to compare this scene to moments in other games, it's very close to Hyrule Market after the 7-year jump, to entering the Twilight Realm for the first time, to coming out of the tomb in Breath of the Wild. It's one of these set pieces that sticks with you, that you think about when you remember The Wind Waker, though I would argue that there's an even bigger one at the end of the game that we'll obviously get to. Removing the Master Sword restores the flow of time, the colors seeping back into your surroundings as the invading monsters begin to march again, a familiar tune from A Link to the Past beginning to somberly play. It might seem silly to somebody who's never been into Zelda, but all of these little details are just incredible to watch play out all at once. You can really see how despite the game looking the most unique, it also pays the most homage to its predecessors. In a way, it's one of the most Zelda games that there are just because of these moments and ideas that feel like an amalgam of what's worked in the past, but have been repurposed to feel more congruent with the themes of The Wind Waker. And it's entirely a possibility that I really am just biased in this regard, but there's something to be said about what constitutes a Zelda game and which entries consisted of those facets the most. And that's always going to come down to what people define Zelda games as. For someone like me, it has to be about exploring a tightly designed and connected map, finding secrets in dungeons, obtaining equipment that allows you to progress, encountering agents of the big bad guy, and eventually taking him down. This describes pretty much every Zelda to me, but some succeed and embody these ideas more than others. Zelda 2 went off the rails immediately and took the side-scroller approach, but it still hits a lot of these points. Breath of the Wild technically hits these points, but didn't feel like a traditional Zelda game to me, and I don't think it's supposed to either. But it also feels like it could have just been a new IP, just like Zelda 2 could have been. If I had to make a godforsaken tier list on the subject, it would probably look something like this. And it's probably strange to somebody who played The Wind Waker and just doesn't think that it feels like a Zelda game in the same way that I feel about Breath. And that's okay too. I'm not here to be one of those people who despises the newest games just because they feel like a big minimalist sandbox with samey puzzle dungeons sprinkled haphazardly throughout them. But I also feel that The Wind Waker often gets passed over as the game where you're in a boat, without much more thought given to just how well it exemplifies the sheer unbridled exploration and dungeon crawling that these games have always tended to put first and foremost. Despite it tearing away from the gloomy worlds of the N64 games, it truly does pull from the greatest hits and forges something new. With the Master Sword in hand, it's time to storm the Forsaken Fortress once more. This is pretty much a power rush, as most of the enemies are no match for your upgraded weaponry. It kicks off with another Ocarina of Time staple, Phantom Ganon, who appears with the same main mechanic as its Forest Temple counterpart. I always did like how the music plays off of what's going on with the back and forth slapping of the energy ball. It's a real nice touch that mirrors the musical stabs during mini-boss fights. Your reward is the hammer, which does what a hammer always does and is used to make it through the newly added stakes in the ground. Clawing your way to the top has Tetra and her crew joining you in order to get the captured girls here to safety before you take on the big bird that started this whole journey. It's as easy a boss fight as they come, probably one of the weakest ones in the game, truth be told, like a lesser version of Volvagia. Making it to the top has you finally confronting and witnessing the full visage of Ganondorf, who looks much more like a middle-aged man than any other variant across the series. I've always loved his appearance in this game because it feels so menacing but also kind of, realistic? I don't know, there's something more down to earth but still sinister about him. This is where the bulk of the game's story unfolds and is still some of my favorite writing across the series. Basically, you're told that unsealing the Master Sword not only initiated the flow of time to Hyrule again, but it also unsealed Ganondorf's full power from the depths of the sea. Oh, quick side note, Ganon is reserved for the monstrous, evil, hog-like form that he takes on in many other games. Ganondorf is reserved for the man himself, who descends from the desert people known as Gerudos. Anyways, while the Master Sword has the latent power to defeat evil, it's currently not charged up, as it gets its power directly from the gods. This power has since been dulled due to interference via Ganon's forces. When the gods flooded the land, they first directed many Hylians to seek shelter at the mountaintops, so that they would survive the downpour. Some of these Hylians were then tasked with various responsibilities. The sages were one such group who took it upon themselves to continuously pray to the gods in order to keep the Master Sword potently charged. Now it's become clear that the descendants who were meant to continue this tradition have been dispatched, making the sword useless against Ganondorf's current power. Watching Ganondorf slap Link away like a fly has always been a visceral image in this game, a reminder that you are in fact a child taking on an adult with unfathomable power despite your upgrades and equipment. Tetra makes it up to the top to help, but is soon overpowered in a similar fashion. Before the man can strike her down though, he realizes that she's the descendant of Princess Zelda. These are the three main characters and have been the main characters across nearly every game in the franchise, and this moment encapsulates just how unusual it was to have them gathered here like this without it being the very end of the game. Citizens of Dragon Roost swoop in to rescue the children, being taken back to the portal to Hyrule for some answers at last. The King of Red Lions is revealed to be none other than the King of Hyrule, who guides Tetra to her true form, Princess Zelda. I've repeated this a few times now, but I honestly do not feel like any other game takes this many cues from the other entries and weaves them together so perfectly. It's more than just repeating equipment or characters, it's these genuine moments of love and reference spliced together to create amazingly paced scenes of nostalgia-laden bliss. Zelda has never been good at complex and intricate world building, instead relying on interesting ideas and fun concepts to serve as a vehicle to unlock the player's imagination. There isn't deep-rooted optional lore that spans tomes located in sparse areas, or rich conversation from characters that explores the depths relating to why society is the way that it is. And The Wind Waker is no exception. Yes, the idea that the gods flooded the world when the people prayed for a miracle is awesome, and the visualization of that event is really fun. The sages being a faction that went on to keep Hyrule sealed is great. Zelda's mom prompting her to hold on to and protect her piece of the Triforce is intriguing. But there are no written entries from these people, no journals, no diaries, no warnings, flashbacks, or dialogue from somebody who was unfrozen when the Master Sword is removed. And when you compare this to the other entries, this lack of expanding on the presented material tracks across the franchise. Ocarina of Time introduces Sheik, who is obviously revealed to be Zelda later on. In this timeline, she escaped Ganondorf's clutches and has made it her goal to fight back against his reign. And that's a really cool idea. But how did she train? It's implied that Impa was the one who trained her in the ways of the Sheikah, a tribe of Hylians who defended the royal family. But it's never confirmed. How did she escape? What has she done to prepare for the day that the hero returns? There's no elaboration on what could be a deep and emotional story. Twinrova is said to be Ganondorf's surrogate mother when you ask Navi about it, but literally no other information is given about that. Like, that's such a random lore drop that is never even slightly expanded on. What about the sages in Ocarina? They went through 7 years between Link's disappearance and reappearance, but you don't really get a lot of detail about how those 7 years went besides, bad. And this kind of writing applies to pretty much every other game. You introduce a cool topic, be it a faction, a person, a monster, whatever it might be, and maybe you throw out a fun fact or two. And then you kind of just leave the player to interpret or conclude whatever they want. While I personally think that this is a lazy kind of way to introduce ideas without being bold enough to write accompanying lore, I also see the allure to it. Because this is the kind of stuff that people go wild for when it comes to inventing theories and weaving together ideas. You see the fragments and arrange them in a way that makes the most sense to you, creating your own version of the events. But I'm somebody who gets more enjoyment out of well-written and intricate lore all coming together to tell something more deep and complex. And Zelda has just never been that way. So while I do really appreciate these ideas as they're being brought up, I would have loved a flashback of Zelda's mom discussing the Triforce piece with her, or Ganondorf realizing his desires to obtain power, or a scene where Zelda decides to become a pirate, or anything along those lines. I know it's a me thing, and there are fans who think this kind of fill-in-the-blanks writing is perfect, and I do respect it also. It's just not my favorite form of storytelling. Okay, so as you might have assessed, it's time to power up the old MS by completing 2 more dungeons. At this stage, you can handle most of the sea and explore most of the islands, but the one thing about doing that before taking out these dungeons is, well, you're gonna be missing the equipment needed to do some shit. I've seen this posted as a complaint about this game, which I've always found to be silly. Like, nearly every Zelda game has endgame gear requirements in order to crack open certain loot rewards sprinkled throughout them. I guess the difference in this one is that you're sailing to get to them. Regardless, this whole chunk of the game is the quintessential Wind Waker experience. Because you need the iron boots in order to get into one of the dungeons, and the power bracelets to get into the other. And to get to those 2, you need to go to the Fire and Ice mini-dungeons. And to get into those, you need Fire and Ice arrows. And to get that, you need to take on the Wind God who's driving the tornado. And to take him on, you need the bow. It's all linked together in a way where you have to take all of the knowledge that you've been gathering and put it to use. Because there's a good chance that you've seen that cyclone, maybe even gotten tossed away by it once. And when you defeat him, you learn a song that lets you teleport. And if you use that to hit the quadrants that you haven't mapped, you'll eventually get to one where you land in a fairy fountain, where the Fairy Queen gives you the Fire and Ice upgrade. And there's a very high chance that you've at least seen the volcano because it's an eyesight of Dragon Roost, so you know where to go for that. It just feels like everything is coming together and meshing in an amazing way. And this works if you've played the game before and know where everything is, because in my experience I used all of my magic up while I was fucking around at the volcano. So I went to the ice dungeon and I couldn't use fire arrows because I was out of magic. Now I could have just teleported to some place that would have shit to kill for magic, but I knew that there was a big octo somewhere in the bottom of the map since I've beaten this game probably 8 times. So I just went to that, which had me gaining the magic meter upgrade. Problem solved all in about 3 quadrants of travel. It just feels good to sail around this map when you have everything going for you, and nabbing all of these upgrades before going to the Sage Temples was easily the best part of the game for me. Heading to either location has you learning a song from the spirit of one of 2 sages, who tell you that when Ganondorf was resurrected, he cut them down, meaning that we now need some replacement sages. That would be Medli, the bird girl from Dragon Roost, and Makar, the Korok from Forest Haven. Heading to both has you conducting them with your Wind Waker, sending them into a trance and having them reawaken as a sage, which is another borrowed plotline from Ocarina in which the people that you rescue or help out instantly understand their objective and basically go, "Oh, holy shit, I'm a sage now, let's rock." This brings us to the partner dungeons, one of which is infinitely better paced than the other. Let's go with the good one first, Medli's Earth Temple. This is a pretty well constructed series of puzzles that has you using Medli to fly further than you could go with your leaf, while also assuming direct control of her and having her flap around, stand on switches, and use her instrument to reflect light beams at enemies and puzzle elements. The command part itself has always felt very slow and cumbersome because you have to play out the tune in order to get her moving. It's the worst part about the command melody. And you could say something like, well, Ocarina and Majora's both had these parts where you had to play an instrument in order to progress. And you would be right, and I didn't like those parts either. But the nature of the Wind Waker means that you're playing at a set tempo. You can fly over the buttons to play an Ocarina as fast as your fingers will carry you, but using the Wind Waker is always an event. And you'll usually be doing it a lot more as the entire dungeon revolves around cooperating with your partner. So the Earth Temple's theme is, light, actually. Kind of fucked up that one a little bit if you ask me, but here we are, I guess. Besides using Medli to solve puzzles, you'll be creating patches of light and reflecting it where you can in order to proceed. This includes revealing hidden chests, knocking down walls, destroying statues, freezing enemies, and so on. I've always kind of enjoyed it, truth be told. It just feels good to reflect the light where it needs to go. And of course that makes the big dungeon loot wind up being the Mirror Shield, a staple that was in a good 8 or so Zelda games and then just completely forgotten about until Tears of the Kingdom. But the enemies and hazards that accompany this dungeon are probably some of the most interesting and fun to deal with, and they're what makes it as good as it is. You have the Floor Masters, which try to grab you or Medli and take you away to different parts of the dungeon. I was always scared of both these and the Wall Masters when I was a kid just because of how they combined a creepy sensation with a loss of progress in a dungeon. That said, we also haven't seen either of these in a mainline Zelda game since the Minish Cap in 2004 for Floor Masters and Link Between Worlds in 2013 for Wall Masters. Unless you count Triforce Heroes in 2015. I don't, but I'm hardly an authority. In addition to the hands, you have ghosts that only become vulnerable when light is cast on them. They'll possess you and reverse your controls if they manage to latch onto you while they're ethereal. And you've got Redeads, which you would think would be an all-time classic in Zelda games, but they've surprisingly only appeared in 5 total entries. I guess the devs decided on Gyptos as the main zombie creature for their games. But I mean, as much as the Floor and Wall Masters freaked me out, Redeads had me playing like a scared child because, I was a scared child when they were prevalent. Still, it's not like Nintendo helped me to get over this because these things basically petrify Link with fear, shuffle over to him, and wrap around him, biting at Link and draining his health. I will say that Ocarina has always won in terms of flavor, seeing as Redeads are found in the decaying Hyrule marketplace, likely making them former residents who withered away during Ganondorf's reign. But Wind Waker wins when it comes to actual spooky design because they fucking shriek at you like a banshee when you get near them. Beyond the enemies, a purplish fog fills certain parts, which makes you unable to use any equipment under its effects. And yes, light will get rid of it, but so will your leaf for a certain amount of time. So sometimes you'll need to clear it out, take out a lurking Floor Master, and repeat the process. It's just a really tightly designed dungeon that made me feel like I was always solving and accomplishing things, which is exactly what you want from a Zelda game. The only complaint that I really have beyond the command melody is one of the final rooms, which is a big light puzzle. Well, puzzle is putting it loosely. You're basically just moving statues to the one designated tile that they have to go to, using the light to break another statue free and then repeating it about 8 times until the room is solved. It feels complicated, but it's very simple, and it's more tedious than fun. The boss is another really easy one, and it's kind of hard to forgive this kind of easy design this deep in. Basically, light stuns it, and then once it becomes vulnerable, you pick it up and throw it into the pillars here. Now, I do like that it brings back the power bracelets as a mechanic in addition to the Mirror Shield, but once it divides into a swath of ghosts, you take out a few and then repeat the process. Even when the thing goes to attack, simply running to a light beam and deflecting for a millisecond will cause it to snap out of it, allowing you to basically beat this thing with next to no effort. Either way, with one partner dungeon down, let's go take a look at probably my least favorite dungeon in the entire game. The Wind Temple takes the issue of needing to use the command melody and cranks it to 11, as Makar is much slower than Medley and constantly needs to be told to do things around the dungeon. Move over here and press a switch, plant a seed, float to the next part, plant a seed, repeat until you get to the top. And it would be one thing if what was being presented was interesting, like the leitmotif of the last temple. But this temple does live up to its name and kind of just does the wind thing repeatedly. Floating with the leaf is fun, but it gets old when that's all that you're doing. And to pile on to the mediocrity, it feels like nearly every room is built to be positively annoying. Like if you don't take out these enemies, then they might hurt Makar. Or you have to hit a switch, move to another part, hit a switch, use a jump pad, hit a switch. It just doesn't feel like you're solving things in a creative way. And maybe that's just a me thing, because you could argue that the Earth Temple was just shining a light on a thing and then moving a block repeatedly. But something about the environment and the pacing of all of that just felt better than what the Wind Temple is bringing to the table. There's just something to be said when the best part about the dungeon is the part where Makar is snatched away and put into jail and you have to quest without him for a bit. The treasure here is the hook shot, which is like the grappling hook but less swingy. Even this has some very annoying puzzle solving built around it, as most of what you'll be using it for is hooking up to a platform, looking for the next one, and repeating until you get to the top of an area. As far as enemies and dungeon-specific mechanics go, there is nothing new whatsoever, which is another failure when compared to the Earth Temple before this. So the only thing that this dungeon really does well is nail the flavor of the wind-centric temple, which is the least important thing considering the Earth Temple's theme. Ironically, the boss is very much, it's a worm that hides in sand and creates sinkholes, which is like fucking perfect for the Earth Temple. That wacky shiggy can't be stopped with these rampant decisions. I will say that this boss music is the best in the game by far, and the fight itself is also among my favorites, much better than anything else that we've gotten so far. So at least the Wind Temple has that much going for it. It's like a slightly better version of Volvagia. When all is said and done, the Master Sword is restored at last as Makar plays his tune to imbue it with the power needed to strike down evil once more. I never mentioned this, but both Makar and Medley's themes sync up to be the main theme song of the game, which I've always loved. Makar's is the better part to me personally, but I don't think I'm alone in that assessment. So this is where the rest of the game unfolds, and you're truly unchained to explore every quadrant of this vast ocean. By now, most of the middle of the map has been organically explored, but the edges remain barren and can probably feasibly remain that way if you beeline it for the Triforce pieces and head to the end of the game. This hunt was such a gigantic pain in the ass on GameCube that it probably single-handedly caused the most valid complaints about this game. I mean, I had to use a strategy guide myself to help me track the things down, which was probably the only reason that I got through this game when I was younger. And there was merit to this approach. You'll hear a lot of fans of older games like Morrowind revere this kind of design. The idea that it didn't hold your hand being one of its guiding stars. You had to pay attention, to write stuff down, to plan out how you were going to approach things. And the Wind Waker tried to follow that philosophy, but it wasn't quite the right vehicle to deliver it. I respect the treasure hunt idea a lot, but you have to understand that this game's puzzle elements haven't exactly been brainbusters. Things felt good to explore and solve, but too much of that and you have a game that gets boring fast. Let's put it this way. You've finally acquired the thing that you need to kill the final boss. And instead of going to the last dungeon, you now have to collect maps. And these maps are scattered everywhere. Okay, fine. You find a map location, head in, do a minor puzzle or complete a boss fight, and then obtain the map. Great. Now you have to do that 7 more times. You track everything down, do all of those puzzles that are nothing incredible, and gain the other 7 maps. Now you take those maps to a guy to get them translated and identified, and he charges you $398 a piece just to simply know where the treasure pieces are. So now you have to grind out about a total of 3,200 rupees. You do that, get everything identified, and then head to each location to fish up the treasure. Congratulations, you just spent hours and hours of your life just to get permission to kill the final boss despite having all of the equipment to do so ahead of time. Something like Morrowind would give you that lack of direction but usually had you discovering something fascinating each time, and it was hardly ever mandatory. It's one thing to hunt for upgrades, be they heart pieces, bomb bag upgrades, and so on. But when you're made to track down some MacGuffin so that you could get things rolling, it doesn't feel particularly rewarding. So what does the HD version do differently? Well, it kept the 3 most interesting map hunts and lets you find the rest of the Triforce pieces immediately by paying for a master map right off of the rip. So the whole process keeps the most interesting parts of the original treasure hunt while letting you save time and money overall. It's a much smoother experience, and I personally enjoy the idea of saving time here and spending it hunting down more tangible rewards like the aforementioned heart pieces. It very naturally gets you interested in side questing, which there is a lot of. I'd go so far as to say that the game's total length is nearly doubled if you take the time to do stuff like hunt down heart pieces or try to acquire the magic armor. You have the 2 fathers on Windfall who have swapped positions. The rich dad sold his fortune to gain his daughter back from the pirates, and the poor dad sold a fuckload of skull necklaces which his daughter has brought back from the Forsaken Fortress, making him rich enough to buy the other dad's manor on Windfall. Of course, their attitudes both completely flip-flop too, as the previously rich dad is grateful for his daughter back, and the previously poor dad treats everyone else like poor scum now that he's rich. Giving the latter more skull necklaces to sell has him granting you a map that leads to a heart piece. Meanwhile, you can gain another one in the same room by talking to his daughter who fell in love with one of the moblins back at the Forsaken Fortress. Of course, the previously poor dad hates the fact that she's talking about this actual monster as somebody that she loves, but that's also where she got all of the skull necklaces from, so it's kind of funny. The former rich dad's daughter winds up trying to steal from the safe of her employer at night, and catching her sets her straight while netting you another bottle in the process. I know I gave the game flack before for only having one real chunk of civilization, but the devs did make it count when it comes to side questing, as nearly every person on this island has some kind of objective for you to take care of. And of course there's the rest of the damn ocean for you to explore for more loot also. Like I said, you can beeline it through the Wind Waker story and wind up with a little over half of the map visited, meaning that the other 30 to 40% is all side stuff for you to delve into with rewards at every turn. There's mini games like the cannon shoot at Spectacle Island, the boat race at Boating Course, the flying contest at Flight Control Platform. I feel like we ran out of names here at some point. Not to mention that half the damn islands are named Star Reef Island Isle. There are also little puzzles to solve like the block towers at Angular Isles, and exploratory chests like the one on the ledge at Greatfish. There's an entire merchant trade quest that pulls from the Bigoron sword quest in Ocarina, and has you trading between merchants in order to help out the shop on Windfall with its supply line issues. There's a photography quest that has you snapping pictures of people at precise moments in order to upgrade your camera. It's just a really fun string of exploration, combat, puzzles, and general fun. I will say that doing everything that I did with a guide to help me beeline to locations and objectives made this whole endeavor of filling up my hearts take about, I'd say just under 3 hours. Without that, it's hard to say how long all of this would have taken organically, but I like to imagine it's at least double that amount. I also completely left out some of the more tedious objectives like watering all of the Deku Tree saplings, finishing the trading sequence, and hitting the old Swordmaster 500 times. They're obviously all doable, but they're also a pain in the ass and I'm here to have fun. But what about the actual Triforce pieces? Their collection runs the gamut of okay to collect to pretty damn fun. My first one wound up being an enemy rush, which had me defeating rooms of enemies in classic Zelda fashion. Next was the Ghost Ship, which is an amazing idea on the surface, but I will say that the execution is a bit lacking in one area in particular. The setup is great though. Basically, there's a fucking ghost ship, which is like a big boat that isn't normal. Look, you know what a ghost ship is. And it sails at a different quadrant every night depending on the phase of the moon. The fishman that fills your map up for you will always tell you if the island that you're at is occupying a quadrant that the ghost ship visits, which is awesome and helps you to keep the idea of revisiting at the correct moon phase in your mind. The problem is that if you happen to arrive at the right night and charge at it, you just kind of sail through it. Like, that's all that happens. It doesn't mess with your vision or teleport you to another quadrant or do any sort of damage to you. It just floats with an ominous tune. Because you need a map that shows where this thing is at all times, and then you can board it. So what's the point of the fishmen telling you about its location? That's like 8 fish with wasted dialogue. Now the actual environment of the map quest is... Sorry, I just thought about MapQuest for the first time in a decade and had flashbacks of printing off driving instructions for family trips because we didn't have a TomTom. I just lost the 3 young members of my audience with that revelation. Anyways, the environment here is cool. Kind of has this shipwreck vibe going on with a maze that I almost crushed on my first try but fumbled at the end. But then you go to sail at Mach 10 into this actual ghost ship, and it's just a battle room where the ghostly enemies of the game attack you. You know how much cooler it would have been if it was a room full of 30 re-deads? I mean, it would be crazy to take on, but really fucking cool visually. The next Triforce piece is by far my favorite just because of how absolutely strange it is. So there's this lady who teaches the children back on Windfall, and you can help the children to respect and pay attention to her, which leads you to finding out that she likes these butterfly pendants a lot. These treasures pop up all over the place, from dungeons to goblins to general exploration. Bringing her 20 of them has her thanking you by giving you the deed to a private island. This game really makes you feel like you can own property. Put the IGN music there.
It is a little something for everyone.
Now the key thing that the teacher tells you here is to not tell anyone about this, which... yeah, okay, she doesn't want anyone knowing that she gave away an island for trinkets. But when you go to this thing, it gets a little darker if you read into it in the right way. Basically, you show up and are greeted with a magic door who keeps the island shut away from losers like you were up until 5 minutes ago. You show the door the deed, it welcomes you in, and a cozy room awaits you. You can do one of these sliding puzzles, which I absolutely despise because they make me feel stupid. Plus there's this weird, slightly foggy filter on it, and I kept checking to see if my glasses were dirty because of it. When you solve it, the door shits rupees at you and then tells you there are 15 more. I will not be participating. The main thing though is a secret set of sewer chambers which are beneath the fireplace. Charging through the maze has you eventually making it to another Triforce piece, but not before encountering a room with 2 re-deads awaiting you. And this is strangely enough the plus side to the devs not including those little notes, details, and conversations. Because my mind immediately went, oh shit, the teacher didn't want me telling people because she has literal bodies buried beneath this private island. And it makes that entire interaction that you had with her come off as that much more unhinged and sinister. Again, this will never be a thing where the devs come out and say, yeah, Mrs. Jenkins, her name's not Mrs. Jenkins, Mrs. Jenkins is a lunatic murderer with a dark past who escaped and now teaches children while being obsessed with trinkets. And the fact that I can kind of just make this my own headcanon is kind of cool in its own way. I mean, that's the plus side. The minus side is that sometimes people just make up that Link was supposed to age when they find some kind of concept art. So the lack of detail really is a double-edged sword. The next one for me was literally another room-to-room enemy rush, which sucked ass in terms of creativity. I guess deadlines will do that to a game. And the last piece doesn't need a treasure chart in the HD version and is, it's an enemy rush, but it's a big enemy rush. I'll say that this one is at least more thematically interesting as you take on 10 floors of enemies from the first dungeon, 10 more from the second, and so on. Enemies don't drop anything, so you have to be competent enough to view the screen and dexterous enough to press buttons in order to survive. It's kind of fun in its own way, but a little less so after doing the other enemy rushes before this. You can continue for another 20 floors if you'd like, which nets you the mask that lets you see health bars. I believe this is the first game to do anything like this before Breath of the Wild, which is kinda cool and drastically changes how you approach fights if you're specifically me. Nah, I'm kidding, it looks dumb as hell and I took it off. I'm here to look good, not play good. Finally, there are the 3 that are found via charts that you gather, which you need to get deciphered by Tingle. Now, Tingle has been a long discussed entity in the Zelda series because of how strange he is. But I honestly cannot stress to you just how fucking unhinged this little gremlin of a man who insists that he wants to be a fairy, dresses up in this fucking green screen bodysuit, and generally gets looked at like a menace by the semi-functioning people in any given game. Like, this guy has slaves pushing a wheel so that his head rotates on this totem pole. What the fuck? So I had to look this up because Tinkle is such a particular character, and everyone that I know and have seen talk about him pretty much universally dislike the guy. Tinkle's creation was penned by Takaya Imamura, a longtime Nintendo employee who was responsible for a slew of creative decisions such as the backstory and development of F-Zero, most of A Link to the Past's bosses, maps, and logo, Star Fox's character designs and general development, and Majora's title, the design of the moon, and of course Tingle himself. Tingle was meant to be a creepy 35-year-old dude from the get-go, with his motivator to be a fairy and obsession with the youthful-looking Kokiri tribe being front and center in his design. And of course that's gonna cause a Western audience to cringe away from him. But he's got a cult following in Japan that led to his own spin-off game, with many believing that if you hate him, you must care about him in some capacity. So his entire design is really just a cultural difference, generally speaking. He's supposed to be weird and creepy, which endears people to him in a way that I don't fully understand myself, but I still get the basic idea behind him. The funniest part about Tingle is the confirmation from Aonuma that he is not in fact gay, which is one of the best fucking quotes I've ever read from a higher up at Nintendo. Nabbing the last 3 shards from the bottom of the ocean causes a brief little menu scene to play out, showing that the pieces can in fact be glued together with rubber cement. I kind of expected a little more fanfare than this, but the Boat King just kinda goes, "Ah, sick, let's go back to Hyrule." I still don't know why I need this fucking triangle. Rolling up to the Tower of the Gods has them going, "Yo, you bring that triangle?" So I guess that answers that question. To me, this endgame is about as good as a Zelda game gets. I don't know how else to put it, but it feels like the Wind Waker's final stages are a lot more, I guess, filled with emotion than most other Zelda games. Maybe it really is those big eyes doing the heavy lifting, I don't know. Maybe it's just my nostalgia. But like, hear me out. You show up to the castle and it's already clear that something's gone down due to the statue of the hero being shattered. You head downstairs to surprisingly find Zelda waiting for you, and she just fucking explodes. I would have gone with a shimmer away effect, but hey, an explosion of light works too. Ganondorf performs his evil little speech, throws down 2 mega dark nuts, and Link dispatches them before heading to the wall of light that was previously impenetrable. Shattering it with the Master Sword has him rolling to Ganondorf's lair in the cliffside and beginning the process of the boss rush, which you might be sensing a pattern with this game's objective design at this stage. Basically, you run through 4 themed mini-dungeons, which tend to be long hallways filled with bullshit from each of the 4 major dungeons. So the earth, the wind, the fire, and what was the last one? Yeah, I guess forest or something. And then you fight the bosses again. And I guess that you can call this kind of thing lazy, but I've always enjoyed a good boss rush. It really helps me to feel good about how far I've come along. The flavor is especially good when it becomes clear that whatever magic Ganon is working here involves tapping into your memories in order to recreate these fights, as your inventory becomes limited to what you had during those moments, which is a really nice touch. I think the biggest lifter here in terms of making this whole experience feel good is the music, because Koji Kondo and the crew definitely cooked throughout this game. The simple but dramatic theme on the outskirts of Hyrule, the dire song that hums in the background of this whole boss rush experience, the way that it blends together with the themes of each individual dungeon, and the way that the boss fight themes are warped to sound off-putting and different from your first encounters. It's just good stuff all around that really sells the idea that you're at the end of a great journey. After putting away the memory bosses, it's off to the labyrinth, which absolutely befuddled me as a kid. I don't know if that means I was a dumb kid or if I was just caught off guard. Maybe I was too young, I don't know. because the game starts by basically forcing the answer to a riddle onto you. I don't quite know why, nor can I remember if the GameCube version has this hint. I think it does. But basically you walk into a room and the camera pans dramatically to 4 sconces that are all lit with a different number. Then the king contacts you to go, "Yo, did you see how all those sconces are a different number? You should probably, it seems important to just memorize them, okay?" And then you walk into the next room and it's the same camera panning sequence, but with diamonds. What the fuck happened here? As often as I've praised this game for being the first of its kind to do things a certain way, I definitely can't recall another Zelda game that is this fucking blatant with one of its puzzles. It's really weird. Anyways, the part that confused me as a kid was the actual labyrinth, which has Phantom Ganon showing up to mess with you. You take him out and it's like, okay, cool, now pick a door. And obviously if you choose wrong, you go back to the start. I don't know why it took me so long as a kid, but the hilt of the sword obviously points to the right door, which is a neat little puzzle. Kinda makes giving away that last answer like that much more. Did they playtest this and people just weren't figuring out that they had to light the sconces in the right order? I don't know. Getting to the end of the maze gives you the light arrows, which you then use to kill off Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball for the Xbox once and for all. Now imagine that your entire job is to not only be on the lookout for intruders from a single direction, but to be on the lookout for a single intruder wearing bright green. And then he just fucking rolls past you. Now imagine that same kid goes to fight the door guards and gives them a good fight for half a minute before going, "Oh yeah, light arrows." That's gotta be absolutely demoralizing. Anyways, I'm wading into Let's Play territory at this stage, so let's get to our boss before the boss. Again, the Wind Waker is really good at creating these emotional moments as showcased when you step into the room. And I'm not saying that these are heart-wrenching displays of amazingly nuanced storytelling or anything like that. It's just, I guess, solid moments of well-rounded imagery, animation, and dialogue. Ganondorf looms over Zelda, who's been knocked out. He reads into her dreams, claiming that they're filled with nothing but endless oceans. And then he says something that anyone who's thought about the story has probably been thinking this entire time. If the gods' answer was to flood Hyrule, how was that ever a way to save the world? Isn't that just an alternative method of dooming it? No matter how you view it, Ganon won in this reality. He succeeded at destroying the world. It's just trying to rebuild now. Whatever happened, the hero of time was unable to return or wasn't around to stop him from attacking again. And although you could say that the gods thwarted him, they really just created the same kind of misery that he sought to inflict on Hyrule, just in a different way. From here, he twists and morphs into something monstrous, which has always been a fantastic visual. But then it just turns out to be this fucking thing. Puppet Ganon is still a great boss and relies on you nailing this glowing orb 3 times with light arrows. When you manage to do so, he morphs again, starting the fight over. And then he does it one final time when taking out the spider form. It's one of my favorite fights in the series because it makes you feel like a goddamn marksman when you nail these shots. Now mind you, my hand looks fucked up when aiming with the bow. And it occurs to me just now at the end of the game that I should have equipped my bow to the right bumper. What the hell is wrong with me? How did I not realize this? I don't know why, but my right bumper has always been reserved for the leaf in this game, and why did I play like this the entire game? It doesn't matter. I'm an aiming genius as long as I have 99 arrows. When Puppet Ganon falls at last, the real one makes another appearance, beckoning Link to the top with the still sleeping Zelda under his arm. Again, I'm not sitting here feeling like I'm gonna weep or shit my pants in fear, but the emotional themes are solid and interesting and make you want to scale to the top to get to this final showdown. I feel like Zelda as a franchise has started a slow spiral towards weaker narratives for a long time now. The old 2D games started to slowly build up steam and peaked when the series made the jump to 3D. Ocarina of Time, while not my favorite, had arguably some of the best settings and scenes to create a truly bombastic setup for the final showdown. Zelda revealing her role as Sheik, or I guess Sheik revealing her role as Zelda, I don't know, however you want to say that. She goes doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, you know, like from Melee. I'm fucking getting off track. Anyway, she gets snatched away and then there's this pipe organ scene where Ganondorf monologues, and there are these very strong lines between that and what the Wind Waker does. Majora's Mask was markedly different and kind of hard to compare because of that, but it still had enough going for it, even if I found the whole fighting an evil mask thing a bit lame. Twilight Princess also does a pretty great job at setting up a final battle, with big set pieces being revealed like Ganon's puppet being Zelda herself or the castle crumbling to reveal Ganondorf on horseback, Midna's crown broken in his grasp. And I feel like that's kind of where we stopped with the interesting, emotionally rich scenes. Like I mentioned, I never played Skyward Sword through, but I did play Breath of the Wild, and there really is no setup that comes close to these final moments of the games that I just mentioned. They all do a really good job at pulling all of the pieces together for that storied final battle. But Breath of the Wild opts for this strange anime scene where everyone shoots a big beam of light at Ganon, who's just a big mindless evil monster. And while I haven't played Tears of the Kingdom, I did look it up, and hey, it definitely has some great hype moments to it. Your goofy but lovable sage friends Powerpuff Girls their way at Ganon's army. Link heads off to fight Mummy Ganon, who turns into Daddy Ganon. Shit looks really cool. But I mean, there's really no strong emotional connection at all. No part where you have this burning desire to chase after Ganondorf to kick his ass. I mean, yeah, of course you want to beat him, but I don't know. There's no endearing moment where you feel like your back is against the wall and you're working together with Zelda to end this evil. I guess it feels like the franchise has become the very thing that Aonuma tried to steer clear of back in the early 2000s. You have to understand that these guys made the Wind Waker because they didn't want their games to feel like the exact same thing again with a slight twist. And now we have a game that could have been and was anticipated to be called Breath of the Wild 2, a game that looks and feels like the exact same thing as the one before it. But, with like cars, I guess. And they aren't bad games. I know I haven't played Tears of the Kingdom, but I guarantee you it's not a bad game. But barring Echoes of Wisdom, these two latest entries never felt like the Zelda games that pushed the envelope and tried to innovate while keeping the core components that define the series. Like I said, Breath of the Wild, truly innovative, but not a Zelda game. At least, not to me. As Link gets to the rooftop, Ganondorf muses about his past, something that is especially interesting to me given how uncharacteristic that is of him in other games. He's had his monologues, but this one always stood out to me because he mentions that he grew up in a harsh and unforgiving desert, and seeing Hyrule flourish drove him mad with envy. And before he can expand on that thought, he flings himself at Link in an instant, beating the hell out of him before he can blink. Again, the game has never shied away from Link being a kid, but watching Ganondorf manhandle this boy who has the power of the gods and an anti-evil sort of legend, I don't know. It's just got this unexpected realism to it. Like, I guess if Link was an adult this entire time and then Ganondorf did this, it's like, well, what the fuck, dude? Swing, do something. But it's like, he just got overwhelmed. He's like fucking, I don't know, 12? Who knows what age he is, but you know what I mean? With Link down, Ganondorf assembles the Triforce at last, his plan to bait the hero over to him remarkably similar to his plan in Ocarina. As he wishes to eliminate the ocean, turn the land into a desert, and become its ruler, the King of Hyrule makes his appearance moving at speeds that we did not know were possible. So what does the king wish for? He wishes for hope, for the two children who are up here on this rooftop, and for Hyrule to be swept away by ocean waves forever. Which, let's be honest, a stupid fucking wish, but let's chalk it up to a panic wish to prevent Ganondorf from succeeding. With the water falling in and forming our backdrop, Ganondorf begins laughing, the absurdity of the situation crashing down on him like the torrent surrounding us. Again, him kind of losing it here makes him feel that much more realistically written. And so the fight begins. I suck ass, so pretend I'm playing better. But it's basically just a pretty direct fight while Zelda shoots light arrows at Ganondorf and Link slashes away. The end result doesn't have Ganondorf transforming into an evil beast, which might be one of the only 3D games, if not the only 3D game where that doesn't happen. Instead, Link drives his sword through his forehead, a remarkably brutal ending to a game that looks like a cartoon. And I think it's precisely because of these cel-shaded cartoonish graphics that this was a possibility, and a very jarring one at that. Like I said, I've always loved Ganondorf's design in this game. It feels so much more human, like a middle-aged uncle. And the fact that he doesn't transform into a giant beast only makes that feeling stronger. Watching him take a sword through his brain and turn into stone is just fucking awesome, and I'll always love that about this game. The end of the Wind Waker isn't just a everyone lived happily ever after event. I mean, to a degree, sure, but the King's Wish not only dashed away the chance for Hyrule to be restored, it doomed the descendants of the Hylians to a life of searching for some kind of new land to hopefully create a new kingdom on. Again, the beauty of any given Zelda game is that you can often draw your own conclusions or ideas from the limited dialogue, and to me the king is just as selfish as Ganondorf. He chose to drown Hyrule because he couldn't stop obsessing over it. So to prevent that, he destroyed it once and for all, meaning that the people on the surface have to deal with this harsh seascape because fuckhead can't stop thinking about how there used to be cool castles and actual farmland. I don't know, all of the tones of the ending are fun and happy besides leaving the king behind to suck water, and yet it feels a bit dystopian to me, like making the best of a bad situation. I know that's not what the devs were going for at all, but I think interpretations like these are my favorite part about any kind of Zelda story for the most part. The Wind Waker is a special game that's always had a strong place in my heart. It created a sea box dotted with islands to explore, treasure to find, and monsters to face. It did something that I've very rarely seen replicated or built off of, and it did all of it while creating one of the most Zelda core experiences in the series. As time has gone on, we've gotten further and further away from that miniature garden that the franchise focused on. And although the latest entries have been fun and inspiring in their own ways, I've never been able to muster the same love that I had for the series when I was younger. The reality is that Nintendo has moved away from what Zelda used to be about, and has gotten less risky with a series that has arguably taken some of their biggest risks. Zelda 2 took a huge risk and didn't pan out. Majora's Mask decided to go a completely different route from Ocarina of Times despite the devs having every incentive to create a direct sequel to their most popular game. Wind Waker said fuck it and tried something outlandishly new. And it feels like ever since Skyward Sword, things have become less nuanced and more comfortable. The story became more predictable and less interesting. And while I do understand how much the newer games mean to many people, it feels like only the overhead 2.5D games are still trying to embrace the spirit of this franchise. Thanks for watching. I know this one was a bit weird, but I wanted to talk about something fun, and this is how it turned out, I guess. I'll flip back to something more traditional for my channel for the next video. Until then though, I have a merch shop where I sell, well, mostly shirts, but there's other shit on there. I have a Twitch where I do my damnedest to stream every Tuesday and Friday. I have a Twitter where I tweet out new videos. I have a Discord where people chill and chat in the meantime. And I have a Patreon. And that's it. Have a good one.